Welcome to another Empowered webinar. Today we are going to talk about supply compliance management. So supply compliance management that we're going to delve in today, obviously with the lens on, BEE supply compliance management. So we are going to be looking at a few of the sort of reasons that it is important. We're going to look at an approach to how to proactively manage it. And then we're going to look at these specifications on a BEE certificate, what is deemed valid and not, and then the consequences of sort of mismanagement. I realize now that I haven't introduced myself, so apologies for that. I am Mitishka. I head up the customer success space at Empowered Business Solutions. We're very proud of the space. It's our BEE technical geek team that gets coupled when you procure a BEE software license from Mpowered. Of course, these are offered to all existing clients on a monthly basis. So I know that there's familiar faces in the crowd, and it's always nice spending time with our clients. And, even if it's, a minute off this webinar that adds value, then we consider that a success. So please, if you have questions, pop them in on the Q&A or the chat block. I will look at both at the end of the session. Also, that you've got access to the whole team at Empowered from an on-demand support perspective. So we've got that live chat and email and call, like the normal phone line that you can call on in terms of, responding to your queries. Or you can reach out to your dedicated customer success specialist, because as an existing client, you each have your own dedicated resource. Okay, let's get straight into it then. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the importance. So why is supplier compliance important? Again, I said we're talking about this based with a little BEE lens on. The first, obviously, because of BEE, procurement is 29 points on the BEE scorecard. So, looking at a very rough figure of around 100 points, it's more or less 30% thereof. Procurement as an element belongs to the broader ESD element, which is enterprise and supplier development. It carries a lot of weight on a procurement, on the BEE scorecard. So you want to get it right, essentially. The second reason why it's important is that ESD, so enterprise and supply development, is a priority element. And so because preferential procurement is a sub-element of ESD, in essence, it is also a priority element. So it has its own sub-minimum that you would need to meet in order to not be discounted. So we'll talk about discounting when we get to the consequence section a bit later on. But essentially, it's important because it carries a lot of weight on the scorecard. It is a priority element on the scorecard, and it drives BEE. So there's no legal requirement that says you need to have a BEE certificate. Your suppliers are knocking on your door, you're knocking on your suppliers' doors. There's a movement within the procurement realm that gently drives BEE. You need it for tenders, you need it for new business, you need it to get preferred business, to be a preferred supplier. So there's a procurement push that sort of nudges BEE along. So again, you'd want to get the element right, okay? Annual cycle of the BEE certificate. So BEE, as everyone knows, is an annual cycle. You have your measurement period, which is generally your financial period. You've got to get rated on your most recent financial period. And so what that means is as the periods come up, they've got to be reviewed, and you get a BEE certificate issued on that measurement period. And, as the months go on, they expire. There's a new measurement period. So there's constant movement and this constant cycle of annual BEE certificates, not just for you, but for your suppliers. So you need to keep your finger on the pulse and ensure that you're tracking on your suppliers' compliance certificates. Okay, then there's the matter of empowering suppliers. So when the amended or revised codes came about, they introduced this concept of empowering supplier. And everybody, I wouldn't say has forgotten about it, but there's definitely not as much emphasis placed on it because the DTI had released a blanket statement saying that everybody's deemed empowering until further notice. And a lot of people also forgot that like few words at the bottom, that until further notice. That further notice could come today, it could come 2 days from now, it could come 5 years from now. So it's already been around for a good few years. So everyone is deemed empowering. So all South African business operating entities are deemed empowering until that notice is retracted, if it gets retracted. In the event that it does, you would then need to refer back to your respective sector code or the normal codes if you're not belonging to a particular sector. And you would need to then go and check that criteria for empowering and see whether as an organization you actually are empowering or not. So yeah, so it is important for you as a business to see whether you are an empowering supplier, and equally as important for you to check on your supplier statuses to determine whether they are empowering suppliers, because that certificate, even if your supplier is a level 1, if they are deemed not empowering, that level 1 is as good as non-compliant. So it's very important. And also the empowering status hits every single indicator of your procurement scorecard. So on your procurement scorecard, you're getting points for just buying from compliant suppliers, QSCs, EMEs, Black owned, and then Black woman owned. On all of those indicators, there's a prerequisite for empowering suppliers. It's very important to be aware of it. I think a lot of people forget about it because of this blanket statement, but you need to be prepared in the event that that statement gets revoked or retracted. Okay. All right, so we sort of spoke about generally what supplier compliance is and why it is important for you to track and measure it. So then how do you do so proactively? Okay, of course, we're a BE software company, so for us, automation is key. So our first tip to clients would be to, or to anybody really, would be to automate the supplier tracking. We've seen a lot of companies that have a small number of suppliers, and so they're like, oh, it's fine, I'll just manage it on Excel or whatever the case is, which is also fine, obviously with the relevant, integrity and validity checks built into those sort of spreadsheets. But essentially automating the process helps gaining traction on your suppliers and helps you to build profiles on your suppliers so that you understand who's who in your supply chain, what goods and services you're procuring from them, can those be changed, are they strategic suppliers? So you really start understanding and almost mapping out your supply chain. Now, once your supply chain is mapped out, obviously it's better or easier for you to then make more informed decisions, change the strategic focus perhaps, just to get a better grasp on your supplier compliance, how it impacts your scorecards and what you can and cannot do if you are looking to either improve that score or maximize that score. Okay. Integration. So of course, these are all just little tips on efficiencies that you can build. Apart from automation, which is obviously maybe, I wouldn't say the main one, but a big one, you can have integration. So most systems out there now have integration sort of tools that you could use to plug in. I mean, Mpowered system integrates with all source systems. So in the event that you want us to plug directly into your source system, just let us know. We're happy to do that. So the way that we've built the systems is that we can integrate and play nice with everything out there. And so you just, again, what does integration do? It helps create these little efficiencies. That 20 minutes or that 1 hour of time saved is just time saved on you doing an administrative burden sort of task that you can then, reallocate that time towards maybe something more strategic. So another tip for proactive supply compliance management is just visibility into the process. So again, we sort of point 1 and point 2 spoke about mapping your supply compliance. We spoke about creating little efficiencies in this process of profiling your suppliers so that you understand, who you're dealing with, why you're dealing with them, so that you can really start making more impactful decisions, more informed decisions, and you can very quickly highlight who your strategic suppliers are, who aren't your strategic suppliers, which a lot of people don't focus on, but they should, because generally it's the ones that you have flexibility on that you can maybe then use to, change here and there or improve on the scoring or whatever the case is. So just visibility into an overall process will help for informed decisions. Okay. Next point we wanted to talk about is just education. Like, for whatever reason, we don't see as many supplier days as we used to. I think, especially when BEE was sort of new, everybody was doing supplier days to explain to their suppliers how they fit into, their supply chain and why it was important. And I think there's still a large dynamic where, I wouldn't say there's a lot of ignorance in the industry still, but there's still a lot of unknowns and newness from a BE perspective. May 2019, those changes were released. It doesn't seem as recent anymore, but you'd be amazed that there's still companies that are still not aware of some of the May 2019 changes. So just education, knowledge sharing, exactly, like what the session is trying to achieve. The more we talk to you, the more you can talk to them. And we hope that would yield a sort of better result, because of course, as they know more, they're better prepared to then go out on their compliance journeys, and the more positive impact on their compliance journey, then the more positive the impact on your compliance journey. Because as you know, your procurement score is completely relative to their compliance score. Okay, and we can help with those education days and supply days as well. So in the event that you want to do something like that, then just reach out to your account manager or your customer success specialist, and he or she will hook you up. Okay, then policies. So again, seems like such a sort of, simple thing, but we find that sometimes a lot of our companies don't necessarily have policies in place for changes or change management. So, what happens, or what is the process when I need to stop supplier A and start supplier B? Is it as simple as the procurement manager's call or the procurement specialist's call? Or, is there a, vendor rollout based from your source system? So we find that sometimes simple policies, just your simple procurement policies, are not in place. And even if they are, they're not updated regularly. So our tip would just be to just go have a look at the policies that are in place, if they are, and just have a look-see to see whether they're relevant. Are there a lot of red tapes if you want to change a supplier to go, maybe more after strategic point of view and maximize on your supplier scorecard? Are you, do you have that liberty to change suppliers? That sort of a thing, just to sort of make sure that the administrative box, in the operational sort of movement of your procurement department is met. Okay, which sort of talks to the next point, readiness on supplier swap. So, let's say you have a company now that they're almost there in terms of maximizing their points. They understand that they need to change a supplier or two to maybe go after, somebody that's perhaps have a higher Black ownership percentage, or that has a higher level, so that they can get more of an impact on the adjusted recognition that they get back from that supplier. Now, we found that sometimes businesses just get comfortable, like they are happy with the suppliers that they use, they've got good relationships, they get preferred terms. So whatever the sort of reasoning is, it's just, a tip or a note to just be a little bit careful and to not let those reasons or overshadow potentially just now changing that supplier if need be. Are there any plans in place should you get a specific good or service from a supplier? What happens if that supplier can no longer provide that goods or service? Do you have backups? So there's a sort of forward thinking aspect on the supply chain that I don't think is given as much attention as maybe it should be. The pandemic has taught us, and we've seen so many businesses close. So the pandemic has taught us that things change. So, are you prepared as a business if your largest supplier were to drop 5 levels? That's a bit dramatic, but maybe drop 2 levels, or, their Black shareholding leaves the business. Like, are you aware of those potential changes that could come, and how to respond to them in a manner that's not going to significantly impact your procurement scorecard. Just to finish up the proactive supplier compliance, so ensure valid matches. So what that means is that in your supply chain, you sometimes buy from consolidated ratings. So you'll have a supplier that belongs to a group of companies, and then you're thinking, okay, I'll just get that group certificate, BE certificate, and we're good to go. Just be very aware and conscious of who exactly you're buying from in that group, because it doesn't always mean that if that particular supplier belongs to a group of companies, then that supplier was included in that group of companies certificate. So those annexures are there for a reason. They list the entities that were included in that audit or that were consolidated within that audit. In the event that you are buying from a supplier that is not on that list, you cannot use that certificate, even though you can prove that this subsidiary or division or business unit does belong to that group of companies. If it's not included in the audit, it can't be used. And a lot of people get that wrong. They assume that sister companies, it's okay, we're buying from the group. It doesn't always work out that way. So, something that the verification agency would specifically come out and check is they would then pull that certificate, they will look at the VAT and registration number of those business units or of those subsidiaries. They will then ask you for invoices to match that VAT number or that reg number. So in the event that it doesn't match, they will kick out that supplier. So just to be aware of that, because I've seen some clients getting their fingers burnt with that particular instance. Okay, so we spoke about the importance, we spoke about how to sort of just keep your eye on your supply chain, ensure that you've got processes and procedures in place, so that you have some flexibility on your procurement scorecard, so that you're not getting caught off guard, so that you just have this proactive management. You know what you're going to score. Again, using tools such as the Mpowered systems would help you do things like that. You can do scenario planning, so that you have a little bit more firm grounding on where you are on your procurement scorecard. Okay, so now I want to talk about what equates to a valid certificate. So as you know, Mpowered has the B-BBEE database, which is the largest database of BE certificates. We're always so proud of that. And it syncs directly into both of our systems. But because B-BBEE is a public domain, we get a lot of sort of crowdsource. So we've agencies and consultants and just clients that are uploading certificates on a daily basis. And we get this constant stream of new certificates, and we literally have somebody sitting and validating the quality of each of those certs, because you'd be amazed what we still find sometimes. So I want to talk about your generic companies and QSCs first, because I feel like there is the least amount of sort of noise in that regard. But then I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on EMEs, because we reject EMEs a lot. And we'll talk about why in a second. Okay, so generics and QSCs. So with generics and QSCs, 98% of the time, I would say, maybe 95 to 98% of the time, you're getting valid certificates from a SANAS accredited agency. So what needs to be on the certificate? So you would need to look at whether the registered name and trading name is on that certificate. Again, sometimes they put the registered name without the trading name, and you have the trading name on the invoice, and then, that's quite easy to fix, because then it'll look at the second point, which is the registration number and the VAT number. So again, the verification agency, when they're coming to audit you, will always check that the supplier that you are buying from on that invoice, that's why they ask you for invoices to validate the supplier and the amount spent, matches that BE certificate that you're claiming for that supplier. So the registered name, trading name, registered number, and VAT number need to match, okay? The BEE scorecard type and code type. So in BEE, you get 3 types of certificates: generic, QSC, EME. Okay. Then there's variations based on sector codes. So your certificate or your supply certificate must state whether it's generic, QSC, and or EME. And it must also state the sector code that was used, or the normal revised codes in this, if it was in a sector, in measurement of that BEE certificate or in issue of that BEE certificate. Okay. The BEE status is obviously the level, so that's the most easy one. You have to have the level on the BEE certificate. Issue and expiry dates. That's important because, of course, the issue and expiry dates determine if you can use that certificate in your measurement period. Now, again, even if the certificate's only valid 1 day in your measurement period, you're good to go, you can use the certificate. Something just to maybe note, when a supplier gets a B certificate, so they go for the audit and they get a B certificate, they can go through processes called appeals and re-verifications. In that instance, they could have their certificate potentially reissued. Now, in the event that it's reissued, the expiry date still remains the same. So just be aware of, it doesn't mean that they have a new issue date. And that will automatically attract a new expiry date. It doesn't. And also you'd be able to quickly tell if your supplier has, multiple versions of a certificate, because the agency's meant to put the reissue date as well as the original issue and expiry date. And then also just, that version of it. So when you see a 1.2 or 2.0, whatever the case is, then that that's not the first issue. Again, it's not important as long as the issue and expiry date is somewhat, in your period. Okay, the financial period. This is interesting. So there was a SANAS release that says that all measurement periods need to be the most recent. So when we receive a certificate and the client says the measurement period that was used was Feb 2020, we go back and we say, hey, do you have your Feb 2021 period? Because of that SANAS notice. So the measurement period, because we're sitting in September at the moment, last day, so the client or that supplier would have had a Feb 2021 period already passed, so they cannot use the Feb 2020 as their most recent period. Okay, so that's a financial period. Unique ID number of the BE professional, the verification agency. Again, that's just to validate that agency has the necessary credentials to issue that certificate. So that's, important. But generally we find that, nobody's really going out there putting fraudulent numbers. I think we're in good hands. Technical signatory details. So you would have to disclose, or the VA would have to disclose, who's the technical signatory that signed off that cert. So again, it's important. We hardly find any sort of noise around these sort of elements, but these are what is needed on a valid BE certificate. You will obviously then have the VA branding, so who's the agency that you're using, and then the SANAS branding to ensure that, yes, they are indeed accredited for that sector code to be issued, or normal code to be issued. Okay, so that's on the sort of generics and the QSCs. Remember, QSCs are allowed to get affidavits, but only if they have Black ownership, sort of in excess of 51%, then you get the different levels. So in the event that you do have a Black owned QSC, you can get an affidavit replaced than a sort of normal BE certificate. Okay, so the QSCs and the EM, so the Black owned QSCs and the EMEs, we're going to talk about the affidavits now. Okay, so what deems an affidavit valid? Correct EME affidavit is completed. What that means is that everybody is so familiar with 10 million Rand. If I'm under 10 million Rand, I'm an EME. It doesn't always work out that way. There are sector codes that sometimes have different thresholds. And so it's important for you to be aware of your EMEs that you're receiving, because if that person is construction or whatever, tourism is also different, you'd be able to perhaps not be declared an EME anymore. You might have to get a full on verification. So ensure that the EME is indeed an EME. Name and ID needs to be clear on the affidavit, registered name and the trading name, similar to the point that I spoke on earlier on, so that you can match that is indeed the supply that you're buying from. Okay, affidavit completed by the deponent declaring. This is such a silly one. It's numbered, I even know what number it is. It's number 2 on that affidavit. It says, I, the member, owner, director. And everybody just sort of forgets to complete it. So you have to, if you are completing an affidavit, or if your suppliers are completing affidavits, the person who completed the affidavit would need to validate the authority that he or she had in completing that affidavit. Otherwise, if they didn't have the necessary authority, it's as good as me going and completing an affidavit for telecom. Again, I'm very exaggerative with my examples, but it's just to illustrate the point. Okay, Black ownership, Black women ownership, and Black designated ownership. So again, the percentages need to be clear, numeric values, clear on the affidavit. We find sometimes the Black ownership is clear, the Black women ownership is clear. And then when it gets to Black designated, people get a bit hazy because when you have your Black designated, you have to declare the total percentage, and then it asks you for the breakdown. And that little breakdown will say youth and veterans, and so all of the sort of necessary definitions of a Black designated, you would then have to break down the exact percentages. So if you're 51% Black designated owned, then I would imagine that that breakdown needs to sum up to the 51. We've seen some funnies, so just ensure that that matches. Financial period, again, it's important. It needs to be the most recent period according to that SANAS guidance note that was released. I think it was last year or the year before. It was last year, sorry. That it needs to be the most recent period. Signed and dated by the deponent, which is the person completing the affidavit. So signed and dated, okay? Both signature and date need to be on there. Signed and dated by the commissioner. So whoever that commissioner of oaths is that's declaring that affidavit, sometimes we've seen so common, they would sign it without dating it. And if they do date it, sometimes then that the date is different to the time, so the date that the deponent actually, went and completed the affidavit, and then you argue, but how then did this commissioner actually, declare under oath that this person was of sound mind and whatever's on that little stamp. So just to be aware, we genuinely, the most common reasons that we reject affidavits is because they haven't declared the authority. So that question number 2, that the deponent had in completing that affidavit. And the second common sort of reason that we see a lot of kickouts is because of the dates not matching, or the date is not on there at all by either the deponent or the commissioner. So both need to have signed and dated. And then sort of third reason would be the financial period. So just to highlight there, you'll see even on the affidavit, it gives you the option of declaring, which is the financial period used. It even asks you to declare whether it was audited financial statements or management accounts that was used. So similar to that sort of, declaration of whether you have the authority, whether you're a member or an owner or a director, whether you're going to scratch it or underline it or circle it, or however the supplier completes that affidavit. Similarly, with the financial period, they would also need to circle or underline or scratch or whatever, whether they used the audited financial period or the management accounts. And then they need to clearly put the financial period. So they must say 28th of Feb 2021. So we've seen people just be like 2021 or Feb 2020 or whatever the case is. And so we kick out a lot of affidavits because of that. We find that a lot of verification agencies are a little bit more liberal and sometimes accept some of the certs that we kick out, which we're okay with. We are very conservative on our approach on anything systems and or certificate related. And so we rather, sort of on the side of caution than not. Okay, so we spoke about the importance, we spoke about proactive, tips to measure supply compliance. We spoke about what to look for in a supplier certificate, because now you've got a hold on your supplier profile or your supply chain, and you mapped it out and you know who your strategics is, and you've got processes and steps in place to change management if you need to. And we spoke about then, now that you've understood your supply chain, to ensure that they've got valid certificates and what to look for. So what are the consequences of sort of getting this wrong? Okay, the obvious one from a BE perspective, missed opportunity of maximizing on your procurement score. So, we see a lot of companies that maximize on maybe 3 of the 5 indicators on your procurement scorecard. So they're compliant, and QC and or EME generally is okay, and they're Black owned and Black women owned sometimes is okay. But we find that generally with the sort of Black ownership is where there's some gaps maybe, or between the QC and EME, depending on which one, there's some gaps. So just maximizing that scorecard. If you want to go after those points, you need to understand and those suppliers that you can change. And then from the ones that you can change, are there available service providers to give you that good or service, possibly at the same price, possibly at the same quality? There's a range of variables that come into place. So it depends on how maximizing that score is important to you guys. Okay. Risk of not meeting the priority element altogether. So the priority element is 40% as a sub minimum of that 27 points. Remember, the procurement scorecard is 29, but when you are looking at your sub minimum, you cannot count the bonus points. So it's the 40% of the 27 points. Again, if you don't meet that sort of sub minimum, then you are going to be discounted at a level. So that's quite a significant blow, a whole level if you don't meet the priority element for procurement. So you need to be aware of that. Okay, then there's risk at audit. So apart from not maximizing your score and apart from potentially being dropped a level, 29 points, remember, is a big deal on the BEE scorecard. Sometimes what we see, very rarely, but I've seen it happen before, is that when your verification agency comes through and they are testing and they are sampling and asking you for invoices and ledgers and all of these reconciliations, it is because they are checking for errors. So of course, the more accurate your data, there's no questions and they issue your score based on your claim. However, if they do find irregularities in the data, then you could find that they would ask for more samples, or they would resample altogether, or they would ask you to resubmit your claim, or on the very sort of stringent approach, they might even kick out your claim, which they're allowed to do, by the way. So, kicking out your claim completely takes your 29 points out of the game. And so you can imagine that that's a significant impact. That's apart from maximizing the little gaps that you had, you're now taking a good 30% out of your BEE scorecard. So that's, you don't want to get this sort of procurement element wrong. Okay. Apart from a BE component or like the BE scorecard consequence, there's just spend efficiency. So as a business, everyone needs to sort of watch their pocket, budgets are in play. And so, again, talking to those points on just the willingness or the readiness to change some suppliers, people get comfortable. Sometimes you're buying from a supplier because you've been buying from that supplier for the last 10 years. When last did you go out and check whether you can get a supply that can offer that same good or service at a cheaper price, at the same quality, whatever. So just those assessments need to be done regularly, which is why we sort of highlighted that as a tip for proactive management earlier on. Because in the event of you not understanding that well, or not having that, or having got that right, there is a chance just for some spend to be rand value to be spent when perhaps they could be saved. Okay, so that's a sort of consequence of mismanagement. Then there is an aspect on the BE compliance journey where everyone's focused on, okay, your suppliers and their certificates, and that needs to be in order. But what happens if you get your BE certificate wrong? So the consequences of the sort of act, like fraudulent certificates is what I'm referring to. What are the penalties of those? So of course, again, I touched on the fact that there's no law that says you have to have a BE certificate, and everybody's really just driving it through procurement. So again, if you are one of those companies caught doing some questionable things, then of course you're going to lose business as a result. So if you're trading with a fraudulent certificate, also it creates a lot of stink. So we're all aware of even some of the agencies that have made headlines and companies that have made headlines in the last few years, and you kind of just don't want to be in that place, because it's hard to recover from that. So yeah. Then the second point to just talk on is a rand value penalty and a trail time penalty, which is maybe a little bit more of a concrete consequence. 10% on revenue can be a very large amount, or 10 years in jail is also significant. So just, you're going for audit, be aware of what's going on, especially if you are sort of in the sort of executive team at an organization. I understand that it's always hard to keep track of, operational deeds that you can't sometimes be involved in, because that's why you have management teams under you. But just to be aware of what's going on in your business and how your business is complying in its compliance journey, And then, are you using suppliers that are running that good race in their respective journeys as well? Okay, so that's all that we sort of put together for you today. So what I'm going to do is then just open up a session for questions and answers. So if you have any questions and answers, you can fire away. I'm going to go and have a look, see if there's anything on there. Right. First question. Is a supplier deemed empowering even without a BEE certificate? I mean, you sort of need one without the other. So that blanket statement said all BEE trading companies are deemed empowering. So you can't use a supplier that doesn't have a BEE certificate as empowering. Like it doesn't, because remember I said on the procurement scorecard, there's those 5 indicators and you have to buy from a compliant and you have to buy from QSE and an EME and a black owned and a black woman owned. And the pre-requirement for that is empowering. So you short answer is no. You cannot have a supplier that is deemed empowering, but that doesn't have a BEE certificate. You wouldn't be able to use them in any way. Okay, and then there's a second question. Where could we get a list of SANAS approved BEE verification agencies? The answer is in the question. So SANAS on their website, they have a list of agencies that are accredited. Yeah, that's the long and the short of it. So they do have a list on their website. So you can get it on the SANAS website. Also, something interesting just on that is that sometimes an agency can be accredited, but not necessarily on all sector charters. So a verification agency has to be accredited on like revised codes and the necessary sector charters if they intend on doing audits and issuing certificates for those sector charters. So again, we really, I mean, I feel like I'm a statuette here, but I've never found an instance where an agency is going to be brave enough to go and issue a certificate on a charter or a sector or whatever that they're not accredited to, because that will just, I mean, that will be the end of them in the long and the short answer. So yeah, you can get it on the SANAS website. Okay, on an EME certificate, should the financial period used be full or just when the financial period ended? So it would have, okay, so on a certificate, any QSE generic and or EME, you have to have a full measurement period, so your full 12-month trading period. And so when you say used in full, I'm assuming you mean maybe just written out in full. So as long as they're putting, and it even on some affidavits in brackets, it says DDMM, yeah, right? So it's telling you to fill in 28th of Feb 2021 or 31 December 2020. So sometimes, someone will say, December 2021. Am I going to reject a certificate because of that? Technically I should, but it's on those ones that there's sort of general acceptance that, okay, we can see the financial period that's used. We can see that it's the most recent one, but I've seen something that just says 2020. That's an easy reject for me because 2020 what? And then also we need that sort of month and that year to determine whether it's the most recent one used. It's always lovely spending time with our clients. And again, if you want to hear on a specific topic, I think we're doing management and control next month, deep dive into management and control. So if that sounds interesting to you, you can watch out for the invites. Or if you want to hear about something specific, just pop me a suggestion. I'm happy to take your recommendations. That's exactly why the webinars are here. It's because you're asking for them. So for the ones that have nothing else to ask or no suggestions to make on the webinar topics, have a good day. Bye.